What if I told you that you've never actually made a purely logical decision in your entire life? Crazy, right? And what if that tiny voice you think is your reason is actually just your ego lying to you? I know, that sounds a little harsh, but stick with me here, because understanding this is the single greatest key to unlocking your true potential. Look, we all walk around in our day-to-day lives completely convinced that we are these highly rational creatures, right? We think we weigh the pros and cons. We think we make career choices, financial investments, and relationship decisions based on careful, deliberate logic. We proudly declare that we are driven by facts, not feelings. But in his absolutely brilliant book, The Laws of Human Nature, Robert Greene completely shatters this illusion. He reveals a fundamental, kind of uncomfortable truth about our species. We are almost entirely ruled by deep-rooted primitive emotions that operate way, way below our conscious awareness. We do not make logical decisions. We make emotional decisions. And then our intellect rushes in after the fact to build a very clever, logical-sounding justification for whatever our emotions already decided we were going to do. I mean, think about how incredibly relevant this is for us right now. We live in a culture that absolutely glorifies the hustle. We are obsessed with rapid reactions, hot takes, firing off a witty reply on social media, and grinding 24/7. But this constant, high-speed environment forces us into a stressful, deeply reactive state. Instead of acting with purpose, we're just reacting to the noise. Robert Greene refers to this miserable, exhausting state of being as tactical hell. Look, when you're in tactical hell, you are trapped in the heat of the moment. You are constantly reacting to the moves of this person or that person. You get embroiled in petty dramas, office politics, and endless, pointless arguments. You completely lose sight of your actual long-term goals because you're so focused on defending your ego, proving that you're right and winning the battle of the day. And this is exactly why so many of us keep making the exact same self-sabotaging mistakes over and over again. We take a job for the quick paycheck and the prestige, only to realize 3 years later we are utterly miserable. We send that angry email in the heat of the moment, only to severely damage a professional relationship we actually needed. We push away partners who care about us because some ancient, unresolved childhood insecurity got triggered and we reacted blindly instead of thinking clearly. To really understand why we do this, we have to look at the hardware inside our own heads. Greene explains that for millions of years, our earliest ancestors relied on finely tuned instincts and instant emotional reactions just for pure survival. If a predator appeared, they felt an instant jolt of fear that pumped adrenaline into their blood, and they ran. There was no time to sit and ponder. Emotions evolved as physical arousals, designed to capture our attention instantly. But as the human brain evolved, a newer part was built on top of this ancient emotional center, the neocortex, the part that handles cognition, language, and abstract thought. The problem is, these two systems are not perfectly wired together. Our emotions still hit us as raw physical sensations, and our conscious mind has to scramble to translate those physical feelings into words. And because the translation process is sloppy, we get it wrong all the time. I mean, you might feel a sudden spike of anger toward a coworker who just got a promotion, and you tell yourself it's because they are arrogant and didn't deserve it. But if you were truly honest, the root of that emotion is actually envy. You feel inferior and you want what they have. But since envy is an incredibly painful, ugly emotion to admit to, your brain translates it into a more socially acceptable feeling, righteous anger. This is what Green calls low-grade irrationality. It is the subtle, everyday way our moods and feelings skew our thinking. We fall victim to the confirmation bias, where we only look for information that supports what we already want to believe, because it soothes our ego. We fall for the appearance bias, assuming that someone who is good-looking and confident must also be trustworthy and competent. We fall for the blame bias, constantly pointing our fingers at outside circumstances or other people when things go wrong, rather than looking at our own deeply flawed decision-making. So, if we are naturally wired to be this irrational, how do we ever achieve real success? How do we escape tactical hell? Listen, Green gives us an incredible historical example of what the solution looks like. Back in ancient Greece, the city-state of Athens was facing an absolute nightmare. The rival state of Sparta had basically given them an ultimatum, and war seemed completely inevitable. The Athenian assembly gathered to debate what to do, and the atmosphere was pure tactical hell. People were shouting, emotions were running high, the hawks wanted to attack immediately to show strength, and the doves wanted to surrender out of fear. Everyone was panicked, short-sighted, and driven by their raging egos. Then, a statesman named Pericles stepped forward. Pericles was different. He did not get swept up in the frenzy. He possessed a unique superpower. He had trained himself to never, ever react in the moment. When he felt a strong emotion like anger or insecurity, he would physically step away. He would go back to his home, sometimes locking himself away for days until his emotions naturally cooled down and his mind became clear. He worshipped a concept the Greeks called nous, which means pure practical intelligence and meaning. He personified this ideal in the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. By calming his animal instincts, Pericles was able to awaken what we can call the inner Athena. While everyone else was screaming about what to do tomorrow, Pericles' inner Athena allowed him to look months and years into the future. He formulated a brilliant, highly unconventional strategy. He told the Athenians not to fight the Spartans on land, where Sparta was unbeatable. Instead, he told them to retreat behind their city walls and use their superior navy to keep themselves supplied and to slowly exhaust the Spartan forces. It was a strategy of immense patience and emotional control. He convinced the assembly, and his rational, long-term vision saved Athens and ushered in its greatest golden age. Look, here is the absolute core of Green's message. Rationality is not a superpower you are born with. It is a muscle. It is a skill you have to actively acquire through training and practice. Your inner Athena is sitting inside of you right now, but she is being drowned out by the endless screaming noise of your emotions, your anxieties, and the dramatic people around you. So let's step away from ancient Greece and bring this right down to earth, right? Just you and me, sitting here with a cup of coffee, looking at your life. How do we actually build this muscle? How do we stop being pawns to our own impulses and start playing the game of life with absolute strategic clarity? The very first thing you have to do is radically increase your reaction time. This is the single most practical habit you can develop starting today. When something happens that triggers you, your boss gives you a frustrating assignment, your partner says something that stings, or you see something on the news that makes your blood boil, you must train yourself to step back. Do not send that text. Do not draft that email. Do not open your mouth to argue back. You have to treat your immediate emotional response as a dangerous reflex that you simply cannot trust. Think of it like resistance training at the gym, you know? The longer you can hold off on reacting, the more mental space you create. If you can wait a day or even just a few hours, the adrenaline will flush out of your system, the panic or the anger will subside, and in that newly created quiet space, your inner Athena will finally have the room to speak. You will suddenly see options and creative solutions that were completely invisible to you when you were in the grip of the emotion. You will realize that engaging in a petty argument will only damage your long-term goal, and you will simply choose to walk away. The second thing you must do is become an investigator of your own mind. You have to examine your emotions to their absolute roots. When you feel a surge of frustration, stop and ask yourself, why am I really feeling this? Is it actually about the dishes left in the sink? Or am I feeling a lack of respect in this relationship? Is my overwhelming desire to buy this incredibly expensive car truly about the car? Or am I feeling deeply insecure about my status compared to my peers? I mean, you have to look at your own shadow. You have to admit to yourself that you have petty, selfish, and envious impulses, just like everybody else. The moment you strip away the noble-sounding lies you tell yourself and look at the raw, uncomfortable truth of your own insecurities, those emotions instantly lose their power over you. They thrive in the dark. When you drag them into the light of conscious awareness, they shrink, and you regain control of the steering wheel. Third, and this is a massive one for our daily happiness, you have to start accepting people as facts. Think about how much of your daily emotional turmoil comes from other people, right? We are constantly judging them. We wish our boss was more empathetic. We wish our partner was more organized. We wish our friends thought exactly the way we do. We burn unbelievable amounts of energy trying to mentally force people to be who we want them to be, and we feel constantly frustrated when they inevitably act like themselves. Green suggests adopting the mindset of a mineralogist. Listen, if you are a scientist studying rocks and plants, you don't get angry at a rock for being hard or a rose for having thorns. You simply observe them, categorize them, and accept them as facts of nature. You need to do the exact same thing with human beings. People are just phenomena. They come with their own deeply ingrained childhood traumas, their own biases, and their own irrational blind spots. When someone acts terribly toward you, it is almost never truly about you. They're usually just playing out some ancient internal drama from their own past, and you just happen to cross their path at the wrong moment. When you truly internalize this, it is incredibly liberating. You stop taking things personally. You stop getting dragged into other people's emotional storms. You just observe them calmly, figure out their nature, and strategize the best way to navigate around them. You maintain your absolute peace of mind. Finally, I want you to understand that awakening your inner Athena does not mean you become a cold, unfeeling robot. We are not trying to eliminate emotions. Without emotions, we would have no drive, no passion, and no joy. The ancient Greeks had a beautiful metaphor for this. They described the human soul as a rider on a horse. The horse represents our emotional nature. It is pure, raw, animal energy. It is powerful, relentless, and magnificent. But without a rider, the horse is wild. It gets spooked by shadows, it chases after every distraction, and it constantly runs straight into danger. The rider is your rational, thinking self. The rider cannot move the cart without the horse's power, but through training, discipline, and a firm grip on the reins, the rider guides that massive energy and steers it toward a specific, long-term destination. Right now, if you are stuck in tactical hell, constantly reacting to the world around you, your horse is completely out of control, and your rider is just hanging on for dear life, getting whipped around by the branches. Look, it is time to take the reins back. It is time to pause, breathe, and pull yourself out of the frantic noise of the moment.
Stop letting your ego dictate your actions. Stop letting other people's chaotic moods infect your peace of mind. Cultivate that calm, far-sighted rationality. Awaken your inner Athena and watch how quickly the world bends to the person who can actually think, while everyone else is just reacting. If you ever want to win a high-stakes argument or get someone to say yes, the absolute worst thing you can possibly do is try to prove that you are right. I know, that sounds completely backwards. Crazy, right? I mean, we live in a world where everyone is shouting to be heard. Just log on to social media, turn on the news, or walk into a typical corporate boardroom, and you will see people endlessly firing facts, logic, and data at each other, trying to force the other person to surrender. But let's be real. How often does that actually work? Almost never. I mean, when was the last time someone aggressively proved you wrong and you instantly said, "Wow, thank you for completely destroying my argument. I yield to your superior intellect." Right? It just does not happen. Instead, we dig our heels in. We get defensive. We double down on our beliefs. So, if facts and logic and aggressive debating do not change people's minds, what actually does? How do you negotiate that raise? Or pitch your startup to a skeptical investor? Or convince your stubborn partner to see your side of things without starting World War III? Today, we're going to unlock what I call the psychological skeleton key to human influence. This is based on an absolutely brilliant concept from Robert Greene's book, The Laws of Human Nature. Specifically, what he calls the law of defensiveness. Look, Greene points out a fundamental truth about human beings. Life is harsh, and people are naturally competitive. To survive in this world, we have to look after our own interests. Because of this, we all develop a defensive shell. We want to feel independent. We want to feel like we are the authors of our own destiny. You know?
So, whenever you try to directly convince someone, or argue with them, or push them to change, you are unknowingly threatening their deep-seated need for autonomy. You are essentially telling them that you know better than they do, so they need to listen to you. And instantly, bam, their defensive walls shoot right up to the sky. Once that wall is up, no amount of brilliant logic will ever get through. Greene explains to bypass this wall, you have to understand the human ego. Every single person walking this earth holds 3 unshakable opinions about themselves. These are the 3 pillars of the human ego. If you attack them, you lose. But if you confirm them, you gain the ultimate power of persuasion. The first universal self-opinion is, I am autonomous and I act of my own free will. Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes to feel manipulated or coerced. Even if we are just following the crowd, we will tell ourselves that we chose to do so because it made sense to us. We need to believe our choices are our own. If you tell someone what to do, you are stepping right on their autonomy.
The second universal self-opinion is, I am intelligent in my own way. We might not all think we are Albert Einstein, but we all believe we have a solid, practical intelligence, right? A mechanic takes pride in his hands-on brilliance. A parent takes pride in their street smarts and their life experience. People are never comfortable with the thought that they are gullible or foolish. When you argue with someone and try to prove them wrong, you are subtly implying that they are stupid. And listen, nobody will ever accept an idea if it makes them feel stupid. The third universal self-opinion is, I am basically a good and decent person. We all want to see ourselves as the hero of our own story. We believe we support the right causes, we treat people fairly, and we have good intentions. Even people who do terrible things invent a narrative in their heads where their actions were justified and they were actually doing the right thing. If your attempt to persuade someone makes them feel like they are selfish or a bad person, they will shut you out completely.
So, here is the secret, the skeleton key. The ultimate art of persuasion is to stop arguing and start actively confirming these 3 self-opinions. When you make the other person feel deeply validated, when you make them feel incredibly smart, completely free and morally good, a magical psychological shift happens. Their insecurities just melt away. They relax. That massive defensive wall just drops to the floor. And because they no longer feel the need to protect their ego from you, their mind suddenly opens up to your ideas and your influence. You aren't pushing them anymore. You are drawing them in. Green gives a masterful historical example of this with Lyndon B. Johnson. Before he was president, back when he was just a newly elected senator, Johnson was ambitious and he wanted to rise to power quickly. But he was surrounded by older, powerful senators who guarded their authority fiercely. Look, if Johnson had tried to push his way to the top, showing off how smart he was, he would have been crushed. Instead, he played a totally different game. He approached these older senators and put the focus entirely on them. He asked for their advice. He listened to them with rapt attention. He mirrored their values. He made them feel like they were the wise, benevolent masters, and he was just a humble student. He confirmed their intelligence, their goodness, and their absolute autonomy. And the result? Crazy, right? These powerful men completely lowered their defenses. They fell in love with Johnson's deference. They gave him the exact committee assignments he wanted, handed him immense power, and championed his rise to the top. Johnson didn't argue or force his way in. He validated his way to the top of the United States Senate.
Now, I want you to imagine we are just sitting down together at a local coffee shop. You have your favorite drink, I have mine, and we are just chatting about life. We are looking out the window at people rushing by. Everyone's stressed, everyone trying to get ahead. And I want to ask you, how does this idea actually play out in your day-to-day life? How do you take this profound psychological concept and use it tomorrow morning when you walk into the office or when you sit down at the dinner table? Let's make this incredibly practical because we all face these high-stakes moments, right?
Imagine you were walking into your boss's office to negotiate a raise. The standard old-school way of doing this is to walk in with a laundry list of your accomplishments. You sit down and you practically argue your case. You say, I did this, I achieved that, I generated this much revenue, therefore you owe me a 20% bump in pay. Now, what happens in your boss's brain when you do this? You have just triggered their defensiveness. By demanding the raise and laying out the undeniable logic, you are backing them into a corner. You are threatening their autonomy. If they just say yes, they feel like you forced their hand. So they instinctively push back. They bring up budget cuts. They find tiny flaws in your performance. They want to reassert their power.
But what if you used the skeleton key? What if you flipped the script and confirmed their self-opinions instead? You walk in, but you do not start with demands. You start by asking for their perspective. You say something like, I have really valued your mentorship this past year, and I want to make sure I am aligning my goals perfectly with your vision for the department. From your perspective, what are the most critical challenges we need to solve right now, and how can I step up to take that weight off your shoulders? I mean, do you feel the difference in that energy? You are confirming their intelligence by asking for their wisdom. You are confirming their autonomy by letting them set the direction. You are confirming their goodness by acknowledging their mentorship. You listen deeply to their answer. And then you frame your request for a raise, not as a demand, but as a natural byproduct of you taking on this new high-level responsibility that they just designed. You make giving you the raise feel like it was their brilliant idea, a great management decision that proves how good of a leader they are. They do not feel cornered. They feel empowered. And you get the money. Or let's look at the world of startups and business, right? Imagine you are an entrepreneur. pitching to an investor. Most founders go in and they just talk a mile a minute about how disruptive their tech is, how brilliant their algorithm is, and how massive the market is. They try to overwhelm the investor with their own genius. But listen, investors have massive egos. If you act like the smartest person in the room, you are directly challenging their self-opinion number 2, their intelligence. You know, they will actually look for reasons to tear your idea apart just to put you back in your place.
The master persuader does the exact opposite. You present your idea, but you leave a little space. You ask for their feedback. You say something like, "Look, we have built this foundation, but given your incredible track record in scaling companies in the sector, I would love to know where you see the blind spots here." And when they offer a critique, you do not get defensive. You listen, you nod, and say, "Wow, that is incredibly insightful. I hadn't looked at the market from that angle." Boom. You just confirmed their brilliant intellect, right? You made them feel like a crucial part of the creative process. Because, let's be real, people invest in people who make them feel smart and powerful. By stroking their ego and lowering their defenses, you literally make them want to partner with you. Crazy, right? And look, this isn't just about business. This is about our most intimate relationships too. Think about a failing marriage or a super tense relationship with your partner. You've been arguing about the exact same thing for months. Maybe it's about finances or household chores or how to raise the kids. And you just keep throwing logic at them. You say, "Look at the bank statements. You are spending too much." Or, "It is only fair that you do the dishes since I cooked." And you are completely right. The facts are on your side. But your partner just shuts down, or they scream back, or they just walk right out of the room. Why? Because you are violating all 3 rules of the ego. By telling them what to do, you attack their autonomy. By proving them wrong with facts, you attack their intelligence. By pointing out their flaws, you make them feel like a bad partner. You're attacking their core goodness.
To save that relationship, you have to drop the need to be right. I know it is the hardest thing in the world to do, but it is the only way out. You have to create an atmosphere of mutual warmth. You sit down and you practice what Robert Greene calls deep listening. You do not interrupt. You do not plan your rebuttal. You actually try to step inside their mind. You say, "Listen, I know you have been incredibly stressed lately. Tell me what is going on. I just want to understand your perspective." And when they talk, you validate them. You say, "I can completely see why you would feel that way. You work incredibly hard for this family, and you deserve to feel respected."
I mean, you just confirmed their goodness and their intelligence. You haven't surrendered your own needs, but you have removed the threat. Once your partner feels heard and validated, their defensive wall just crumbles. The tension literally leaves their shoulders. And only then, in that space of safety and mutual respect, can you actually collaborate on a solution. You say, "How can we work together to fix this budget issue so we both feel secure?" Now it is a choice they are making freely, not a demand they are resisting. You know? Look, it is completely natural to resist this approach at first. We all have this cultural prejudice that says we should just be totally honest, completely blunt, and let the chips fall where they may. We think that being strategic is somehow manipulative or sleazy, right? But I want you to think about this differently. Forcing your ideas down someone's throat, making them feel stupid and defensive, is not noble. It is just lazy. It is completely ego-driven. True influence requires empathy. It requires you to step outside of your own self-absorption and actually care about the emotional state of the person sitting right across from you. It requires the supreme discipline to tame your own stubborn nature, to bite your tongue when you want to yell, and to focus on the result rather than the momentary satisfaction of just being right. Listen,
When you master this psychological skeleton key, you stop fighting against human nature and you start working with it. You realize that everyone out there is walking around carrying a fragile ego. They are desperate for a little bit of validation in a cold and competitive world. And when you become the rare person who actually gives them that validation, who makes them feel smart, good, and free, you become absolutely magnetic. People will lower their guard. They will want to help you. They will want to follow your lead. And you will unlock doors in your career, your business, and your personal life that you used to think were bolted shut forever.
You've been told your whole life to be the nice guy or the sweet girl, right? But today, we're going to talk about why embracing your inner darkness is actually the ultimate secret to unimaginable success. Crazy, right? I mean, I want you to think about your typical day. From the moment you wake up and step into the office, or log on to that Zoom call, or walk into a social gathering, you are playing a role. You smile when you don't really want to smile. You agree with your boss's mediocre idea because you want to be a team player. You swallow your frustration when someone takes credit for your work. You type out an email and then spend 5 minutes going back through it to add exclamation points and friendly little emojis just to make absolutely sure nobody thinks you are being too aggressive, right? We live in a culture that places a massive, almost suffocating premium on being nice, on being agreeable, on never ruffling feathers. We are absolutely terrified of being labeled difficult or hard to work with.
But look, here is the brutal truth that Robert Greene exposes in his book. That constant, relentless pressure to be a saint is destroying your potential. It is draining your energy. It is killing your creativity. And it is holding you back from the life you actually want to live. To really understand why, we have to talk about something the legendary psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow, which Robert Greene brilliantly breaks down in The Law of Repression. Listen, let's go back in time just for a second. When you were a little kid, you were a complete, unfiltered human being. You were bursting with raw energy. You had a full spectrum of emotions. You could be incredibly loving and empathetic, but you could also be deeply selfish, demanding, aggressive, and fiercely competitive. You wanted all the attention. You wanted what you wanted, and you wanted it right then, You didn't know the difference between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. You just acted on your natural human impulses.
But very quickly, society stepped in. Your parents, your teachers, and your peers started shaping you. They told you that you had to share, that you had to be quiet, that you had to stop being so bossy, that you needed to put others before yourself, right? You learned that in order to get love, in order to get approval and fit in, you had to slice away all those dark, aggressive, and selfish parts of your personality. You had to take everything that was deemed inappropriate and shove it down deep into the basement of your mind. You built a mask, a polite, civilized, socially acceptable persona. And that mask is what you present to the world every single day.
But listen, here is the catch. Those dark, aggressive, selfish impulses, they didn't just evaporate because you put on a nice mask. Energy cannot be destroyed. It just went underground. It formed your shadow. And the harder you try to be an absolute angel on the outside, the denser and darker your shadow becomes on the inside. Robert Greene warns us that keeping this shadow locked in the basement requires a tremendous amount of psychological energy. I mean, it is exhausting to play the role of the perfect, agreeable person all the time. And because the shadow is always looking for a way to breathe, it inevitably leaks out.
Have you ever noticed this in yourself or the people around you? You know someone who is always incredibly sweet, almost
overwhelmingly accommodating. But then, out of nowhere, they make a totally vicious, cutting remark. Or they agree to help you with a project, but then they conveniently forget, or they do a terrible job, or they show up an hour late. Look, that is the shadow leaking out through passive-aggressive behavior. Because they are too terrified to assert their boundaries directly, their repressed aggression sneaks out sideways just to sabotage you. Or maybe you see it in sudden emotional outbursts. A person who is normally tightly wound and perfectly in control suddenly completely loses their mind over a minor inconvenience, screaming at a barista or raging in traffic. That is the pressure cooker finally blowing its lid. The shadow is demanding to be felt. Listen, when you spend your life denying your shadow, you become a fractured, weak version of yourself. You become a people pleaser who gets walked all over. You let your boundaries get crossed. You harbor secret resentments that just eat away at you. And worst of all, you cut yourself off from your own raw, primal power. Green gives a fascinating historical contrast in the book to prove this point. He looks at Richard Nixon and Abraham Lincoln.
Look, Nixon spent his whole life trying to project the image of a perfectly moral, pristine, self-sacrificing public servant. He furiously repressed his deep paranoia, his vindictiveness, and his aggressive ambition. But because he repressed it so intensely, his shadow operated behind his back. It leaked out in his private conversations, in his paranoid obsession with his enemies, and ultimately in the Watergate scandal that completely destroyed his career. He was a slave to his unacknowledged darkness.
Abraham Lincoln, on the other hand, was deeply aware of his shadow. As a young man, he knew he had a cruel streak. He loved destroying people in boxing matches, and he used his sharp wit to ruthlessly mock his political rivals. But instead of pretending this aggressive, ambitious side of him didn't exist, he consciously integrated it. He channeled that fierce, competitive energy into winning debates and navigating the brutal world of politics. He used his aggression to fight for a noble cause, while consciously maintaining his profound empathy for the public. Because Lincoln owned his dark side, he could control it. Because Nixon denied his, it controlled him.
So, how do we actually do this? How do we stop being a victim of our own repressed darkness and start using it as a superpower? Imagine we are just sitting across from each other at a coffee shop right now, right? Let's get really practical about your life. Listen, I want you to stop trying to fix your flaws by covering them up with toxic positivity. I want you to stop trying to be a saint. I mean, the world doesn't need another fake saint. You know, the world needs the fully realized, authentic version of you.
Look, the first step to doing this is the hardest, but it is the most liberating. You have to actually see and acknowledge your shadow. You have to drop the delusion that you are purely good and selfless. You have to look in the mirror and say, yes, I am deeply ambitious. Yes, I want power. Yes, I want to make a lot of money. Yes, I have selfish urges. And yes, I have a competitive streak that wants to completely crush my rivals. Listen, there is zero shame in this. This is human nature, right? This is how you were wired by millions of years of evolution. Acknowledging your dark desires does not make you a bad person. It makes you an honest person. So, pay attention to your triggers. Notice when you get irrationally angry or defensive. Notice what kind of people trigger your absolute deepest disgust. Look at your own passive-aggressive habits. When you catch yourself agreeing to do a favor that you secretly resent, stop and look at that. That resentment is your shadow telling you that your boundaries are being violated. Once you can look at your inner darkness without flinching and without judging yourself, it completely loses its destructive power over you. The second step is to start letting the shadow out, but on your own terms. Green talks about the immense power of showing the shadow. Look, right now, you are probably paying a massive price for being too nice and deferential. Crazy, right? People do not respect those who just agree with everything they say. People do not promote those who never rock the boat. I mean, they might like you, but they do not respect you, and they certainly will not follow you. You need to start injecting some of that assertive, uncompromising energy into your daily life. Start practicing this in small ways. Stop using weak, softening language in your communication. Stop saying, "I just think maybe we should possibly consider this," right? Start saying, "Here is the direction we need to go, and here is why." If someone interrupts you in a meeting, do not shrink back and let them take the floor. Tap into that aggressive energy, hold your ground, look them right in the eye, and say, "I am not finished speaking." Listen, if someone asks you for your time and you do not want to give it, do not make up a polite lie. Do not say you are so sorry, but you are just swamped right now. Just say no. Say it firmly and without guilt. Now, the first few times you do this, your heart is going to race. Your inner people pleaser is going to scream in terror, convinced that everyone is going to hate you. But you know what actually happens? People will suddenly start treating you differently. They will step back. They will give you more space. They will value your time more because you have shown them that you value it. They will sense an underlying toughness in you, a boundary that they simply cannot cross. And look, human beings instinctively respect strength.
The third step, and this is where the real magic happens, is to channel your shadow into your work and your larger goals. This is what separates the destructive people from the truly great ones. You know, destructive people let their shadow out in petty, cruel ways. They bully their subordinates, they cheat, they throw tantrums. I mean, that is just weak. What you want to practice is controlled aggression. You take all that dark energy, your anger at past injustices, your intense desire to prove your doubters wrong, your sheer ruthless ambition, and you pour it directly into your craft. When you are faced with a massive obstacle, do not get anxious and do not retreat. Get mad. Let that primal, aggressive energy fuel your persistence. Use it to work longer, study harder, and push past the limits that other people just accept.
Think about the greatest athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs, right? They do not operate on sunshine and rainbows. They operate on a fierce, almost terrifying inner drive. They want to dominate their field. They want to completely disrupt the status quo. They use their dark side as rocket fuel. And look, you can do the exact same thing. If you are frustrated with where you are in life, stop whining about it and stop pretending you are okay with it. Harness that frustration. Let it make you bold. Let it make you take the kind of calculated risks that the nice, polite version of you would be too terrified to ever attempt. Listen, when you stop hiding your dark side, a profound shift happens in your personality. You stop wasting all that mental energy trying to keep your mask perfectly in place. You become incredibly relaxed. You become completely comfortable in your own skin. You develop a kind of magnetic authenticity. People are naturally drawn to individuals who are fully integrated, people who are kind and empathetic, but who also have a clear, undeniable edge. We intuitively trust people who do not hide their humanity.
So, as you go out into the world today, I want you to give yourself permission to stop being so harmless. I want you to stop apologizing for the space you take up. You were not put on this earth to be a perfectly obedient, totally agreeable background character in someone else's movie. You have a well of wild, untamed, primal energy inside of you. It is time to open the basement door. It is time to look your shadow in the eye, shake its hand, and put it to work. Because the moment you integrate your darkness, you become absolutely unstoppable.